There is something about Chicago in the 1970s that people who lived through it cannot forget. The Soul Train broadcasts from the South Side, the political earthquake after Mayor Daley's death, the Sears Tower rising to become the world's tallest building. If someone grew up then, they know exactly what made that decade so distinctive. This was a time when Chicago was rebuilding after the 1968 riots while facing massive manufacturing job losses. The Bears were struggling, but the city had hope. The Loop was being revitalized, even as neighborhoods emptied. This was the decade that gave us the Sears Tower, the first Chicago Marathon, house music's birth, and Harold Washington's historic election at the end. Technology was changing how people lived, but slowly. Being a Chicagoan meant navigating economic uncertainty while the city transformed from industrial powerhouse to something new. If you're enjoying this journey through 1970s Chicago, don't forget to subscribe. Homes had a very specific look. Chicago homes in the 1970s looked different from today. The harvest gold and avocado green of the late 60s were out. Mauve, dusty rose, and burnt orange were in. These colors covered walls, furniture, and shag carpeting that was everywhere. Living rooms featured sectional sofas in geometric patterns, glass coffee tables with brass frames, and entertainment centers made of particle board with fake wood veneer. The television was large and boxy, maybe a 25-inch screen. Most families had a cable by the mid-70s SA, which meant more than the 3 basic channels. The remote control was standard. Though large and clunky, the VCR changed everything. Being able to record shows to watch later was revolutionary. Video rental stores appeared in every neighborhood. Friday night meant going to rent a movie. Microwave ovens became standard during the 1970s. Heating food in minutes changed cooking habits. Cordless phones appeared in the late 70s, giving people freedom to walk around while talking. These phones were expensive and reception was poor, but they felt futuristic. Computers started appearing in some homes by decade's end. The Commodore 64 was popular for gaming. The Sears Tower changed everything. In 1973, the Sears Tower opened and became the tallest building in the world. At 110 stories, it dominated the skyline and symbolized Chicago's ambitions. The building represented the city's bid to remain relevant as manufacturing jobs disappeared. Downtown was revitalizing, even as the Loop emptied after 6 p.m. The John Hancock Center had opened in 1969. But the Sears Tower was bigger, bolder. Spider Dung Goodwin climbed it in 1981, capturing national attention. The building said Chicago was still building, still reaching. Even as neighborhoods struggled, downtown was transforming into something new. Mayor Daley's death shook the city. Richard J. Daley had been mayor since 1955. For most Chicagoans under 40, he was the only mayor they'd ever known. His political machine controlled everything. Then he died suddenly in December 1976. The city went into shock. Nobody knew what would happen without Daley. The machine that had run Chicago for decades fractured. In 1979, a massive snowstorm buried the city. Mayor Michael Bylandis' poor response led to his upset defeat by Jane Byrne, who became Chicago's first female mayor. The political stability Chicagoans had taken for granted was gone. Harold Washington's election as Chicago's first African-American mayor in 1983 marked another seismic shift. The election was bitter and divisive, revealing racial tensions that had always existed beneath the surface. Power was changing hands, and not everyone accepted it. Manufacturing jobs disappeared. Chicago had been built on industry, steel mills, meatpacking plants, factories. These jobs paid well and required no college degree. Working-class families could afford homes, cars, vacations. Then it started crumbling. Between 1967 and 1982, Chicago lost 250,000 manufacturing jobs. The stockyards closed, steel mills shut down. Factories moved south or overseas. Neighborhoods that had thrived on industrial wages hollowed out. Cabrini Green and the Robert Taylor homes, built as temporary housing, became permanent poverty traps as jobs vanished. The city's population dropped from 3.4 million in 1972, 3 million by 1980. People fled to suburbs. Those who stayed faced unemployment that peaked above 10% by decade's end. The certainty and prosperity of the post-war decades felt like they were ending. Soul Train was Chicago's gift to America. Soul Train started broadcasting nationally from Chicago in 1971, created by Don Cornelius. Every Saturday morning, black teenagers danced to soul and R&B music. The show celebrated black culture and became essential viewing nationwide. Chicago gave America this cultural phenomenon. Music defined 1970s Chicago. Chess records had shaped blues and rock. Now, house music was being born in Chicago's South Side clubs in the late 70s. Frankie Knuckles at the Warehouse created a new sound that would transform global music. Chicago theater flourished. Steppenwolf Theater formed in 1976 with Gary Sinise, John Malkovich, and Laurie Metcalf. David Mamet's American Buffalo premiered at the Goodman Theater in 1975, putting Chicago theater on the national map. The L defined daily life. Most Chicagoans relied on public transit. The L trains rattled above streets, defining neighborhoods by their stops. Car ownership was lower than in suburbs. You walked to the L, rode downtown for work, walked home. The trains were older, graffiti covered, sometimes dangerous at night, but they connected the city. Winter meant waiting on frozen, elevated platforms for trains that ran late. Summer meant sweltering cars without air conditioning. Rush hour meant being packed in with strangers. The L was Chicago's circulatory system, carrying workers, students, shoppers through the city every day. The Loop was empty after dark. Downtown Chicago had a strange quality in the 1970s. During the day, the Loop bustled with office workers, shoppers at Marshall Fields and Carson Perry Scott. But after 6 p.m., it emptied. State Street became deserted. The theaters that had once drawn crowds were closing. This wasn't yet the vibrant downtown of today. It was transitional. The Sears Tower and other new construction suggested revival. But most people still lived in neighborhoods and suburbs. Going downtown at night felt vaguely dangerous. The city was trying to figure out what downtown should be when it was UNT just an office district. Sports meant heartbreak. The 1970s were brutal for Chicago sports fans. The Bears were terrible, going 5-6, 8-02 for the decade. The Cubs and White Sox both struggled. The Blackhawks made playoffs, but never won the Stanley Cup. The Bulls drafted some nobody named Michael Jordan in 1984, but that's a different decade's story. What Chicago had was loyalty. Wrigley Field was still intimate and affordable. Comiskey Park was rough, but genuine. Fans suffered through losing seasons, because that's what Chicago fans did. The sports radio personalities who would later dominate hadn't yet arrived. You just watched, hoped, and usually got disappointed. Childhood was different. Kids in 1970s Chicago played outside, not because parents forced them, but because there wasn't much else to do. 3 TV channels, no video games until late in the decade. You played in alleys, on stoops, in parks, stickball in summer, snowball fights in winter. Saturday morning cartoons were essential. You'd wake up early to watch Bugs Bunny, Scooby-Doo, and whatever else was on. Arcades appeared and kids would spend quarters playing Pac-Man and Space Invaders. The Nintendo Entertainment System arrived in 1985, but that's beyond our decade. Going to the lake meant 12th Street Beach or Oak Street Beach. You'd take the bus or bike there, spend all day swimming, come home sunburned, no sunscreen, no bottled water, no parental hovering. You who'st went. What defined the decade? What defined Chicago in the 1970s was transition. The city was losing its industrial identity while searching for what came next. Mayor Daley died, ending an era of political stability. Manufacturing jobs disappeared, hollowing out working-class neighborhoods. The Sears Tower rose as older buildings emptied. Soul Train and house music gave Chicago cultural influence, even as economic influence faded. The decade had challenges: economic uncertainty, racial tension, political upheaval, but it also brought growing cultural confidence. Chicago theater became nationally important. The music created here would influence the world. The city was genuinely changing, becoming something new even as it lost what it had been. For those who lived through it, the 1970s were a time of burnt orange shag carpeting, Soul Train dance moves, and watching the Sears Tower rise. It was also when Chicago learned that the industrial prosperity that had built the city was ending, and nobody knew what would replace it. Thanks for watching If this trip through 1970s Chicago brought you nostalgia, make sure to subscribe. There's a lot more history and storytelling coming your way.